Hi, guys, and welcome back to another episode of Women in Math and STEM, where our mission is to reach out to as many professionals, aspiring professionals, students, whatever you name it. We try to reach out to them, who essentially support the initiative of bringing more women and young girls into the STEM field. So, with that being said, as always, feel free to open up the description or transcript to better follow along, and I hope you enjoyed this episode.
Perfect.
Hello, and thank you so much for coming to today and just talking with me. Just to sort of start off, do you mind introducing yourself and sort of telling us how you've ended up where you are today?
Yeah, so thank you so much for having me. If you can't tell from the recording, my name is Sophia and I'm a high school senior from Indiana. And I think for a lot of my life, especially since I grew up in Indiana, I've been shaped by the people that I'm surrounded with and like my community. And in particular, my state is like a pretty conservative state, and there hasn't always been a lot of support for women and other for gender minorities. And that kind of like shaped my identity growing up as a girl interested in things like math counts and math competitions. When I like competed in these competitions, often there were like no girls who would like even medal or rank amongst the top, and that really motivated me to like study why there is this like gender gap in STEM, and then also to create initiatives to support girls in my community. And that's kind of how I how the idea of IndyIntegirls came into fruition. So IndyIntegirls is one of the biggest projects that I'm involved with, that I have been involved with throughout high school. And we are an organization that hosts math competitions for girls and gender minorities in STEM. We started off in Indiana, but now we are hosting virtual competitions from students around the world. And we have reached students from over 15 countries. And then we have also developed an online network through social media to produce opportunities for girls in STEM. And through our online presence, we've reached over 300,000 students. In addition, I do a lot of, other science and math related things, specifically like science fair and ISEF and, junior science and humanities symposium. And I'm pretty involved with, STEM and other aspects.
That sounds amazing. I was just curious, when starting like Indie Integrals, what were some challenges you faced? How have you overcome those challenges, and where do you sort of see yourself in the future in terms of like your work with this organization?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think one like a really important aspect of anything, not even just like nonprofit organizations, is legitimacy. And when you're starting off as like a baby organization, people don't always like believe you and what you're saying. So when you like obviously a lot of these organizations need like resources and financial support to like grow, and for us that was like hosting our math competitions, we needed funding, and then getting like large scale funding to support our vision was really important. But also people were hesitant because they were like, oh, you're just kids from the middle of nowhere, like why should we give you like any money? Why should we fund your vision? And I think something that I learned from that is like resilience. If I look into like my inbox right now, we've sent like tens of thousands of emails to different companies. And I think like it can be really difficult in the beginning, but once you get just like one yes and continue to build up, that's something that's important. So I think that's like, don't be afraid of rejection, and also like keep trying, which might sound a bit cliche. And then like in terms of the future, I guess there's like kind of this thing, like this idea that a lot of people like begin like clubs or like organizations in high school, and then like once they get into college, they like ditch the club. And ideally, I don't want to do that. I mean, right now I'm already a senior, and even though I've finished college applications and stuff, I'm trying to continue IndyIntegrals, and I've tried like scaling it. Now that I have like all these things off my chest, I can like work on something in the stuff that I really care about. Next year, I don't think I'm going to stay in Indiana for college. So balancing that and IndyIntegrals is something that I want to continue doing, and, growing the organization.
That honestly, once again, sounds really amazing. I was also curious, have you had any like good experiences or memories you want to share from your time with Indie Integrals?
Yeah, I think honestly there are a lot of really great memories. I think like going back to what I said like in the very beginning, I think having like the first organizations and like partnerships like believing our vision was really fulfilling, especially after so many people had said no. it always feels good to have like that first yes. In addition to that, I think just like being able to meet a lot of people. I remember, so we have like our in-person competitions and then we have like our online ones. And obviously, our in-person is more for like people in the Midwest and specifically in Indiana, just because it is a kind of a hassle to like drive to the competition. I remember this one girl told me like, oh, I drove from like several states and like stayed at a hotel and like I'm so excited for your competition and that like made me so happy because it's like wow, people like care enough about what we do that they're willing to put in so much effort on their own to make things work.
That really sounds really cool. I feel like that's an experience that not a lot of people can talk about since it's very unique and also like that you probably made a huge impact on their life. And I was also curious about since you've mentioned that you're not only involved in math, you're also involved in a lot of other science related things. I was just wondering how your background in math or your background working with integrals and sort of starting it from the ground up really impacts your confidence or vision or perspective when it comes to other science subjects?
Mhm. I think that's a really interesting question. So I think a lot of times, maybe, I mean, I know I've experienced this, but sometimes like when I open like a research paper for a class, like, like AP research or something, I read it and it's just like a bunch of jargon. It's like, what are these people even trying to say? And I think that that is bad because at the end of the day, I think that research should be accessible and, like understandable for people of all backgrounds if we want to use it to make large scale change. And through IndyIntegirls, I think I've developed the ability to like communicate a message to people better and to get people like on my side when it comes to the ideas I'm sharing. And I think that translates directly to the research projects that I've been doing. Throughout high school, all my projects have been related to like statistics and math because that just happens to be my passion. And when people think about math, obviously it's very abstract and it can be difficult to wrap your mind around sometimes. So I think my ability that I've gained from IndyIntegrals, like talking with like corporate executives or just, a lot of people and like sharing my idea has been able to help me even communicate math and research ideas into more, comprehensible terms and get important messages across, which I think is really important for stuff like ISEF or science fairs, where a lot of the thing is how well you can, communicate the message.
Speaking like about that or like on sort of like the same note, I know that like math can be very overwhelming and like a lot to like non-math people. So I was just wondering like what have you encountered any strategies? Like what do you specifically do to sort of make people more comfortable or make them more excited about learning math versus like being scared or like being fearful of doing it?
Yeah, I think like honestly, a lot of the times there's like a negative stereotype surrounding math. It's like, oh, it's only for nerds. And honestly, why is being called I think like nerd can even be a compliment. But anyway, that's a different topic. I think a lot of times people think of math as like a dull or boring subject and they don't have like positive, it doesn't have like a positive connotation. So I think that like sharing cool things that you can do with math, like obviously math is a foundation for, almost all other sciences and engineering and stuff. So seeing people, giving people ideas on how they can use math beyond like the abstract idea of mathematics itself is cool. And then also, when I growing up, my parents like showed me a lot of like movies about math, and I remember watching like Hidden Figures, and I was like, wow, Katherine Johnson is so cool. I think that this like detaching yourself from the idea of math as a boring subject can be really helpful, and that's something that we try to do with IndyIntegrals is like the community aspect. You can associate math with like collaborative problem solving or teamwork or working with like other girls or like even like cool social media videos. I think that like that gets people more excited about math and gets them thinking about math in a cool way.
Sounds good. I was also just wondering, since school math tends to be more individual, while like there's like opportunities in terms of competitions to have like team-based and collaboration, as you've mentioned. So I was just wondering, in terms of collaboration, like what you sort of learn from either like doing math competitions or like working with a group of people to like start integrals and like, building it from the ground up, and as you mentioned before.
Mhm. I think that like one reason why people care and they should be caring about like girls in math and like gender minorities in math is because gender is a really important aspect of diversity, and that's something that I try to bring to my team in the integrals and whatever problem I try tackling, whether it's like gender inclusion in STEM or just something in like school, because I think that when you're surrounded by a really diverse group of people, and diversity is like from there's a lot of different forms of diversity, but nonetheless when you have a lot of diverse people working together, you get new ideas and you get really novel ideas. And when you can like mesh your ideas together and like collaborate, I think you can reach like the best solutions. So I think that, that's something that I've been able to gain from my teamwork and my, collaboration with other people. And that's really nurtured, the commitment and the importance I have to the idea of diversity and inclusion.
That sounds amazing. I was also just curious about, have you had any memories where you were trying to tackle like a really difficult problem and you just couldn't do it, and sort of like how have you sort of gotten over like that roadblock and sort of moved past it or like solved it later on?
Mhm. So I think there are a lot, I think like problems, there are like technical problems and like social problems. Obviously, since I have been doing like competition math, the big thing is that in competition math, it's like, solving a problem, being really happy and like the next roadblock, and it's like, oh, I can't solve this problem. And you keep like pushing at it. But in terms of like social problems, I think like for me, um, growing up, like I said, where I'm from, there's not really a lot of representation for girls at like really high level STEM, and I think sometimes that really hindered my ability and my self belief in myself. So I think a social top like obstacle I like overcame was like, I guess, self doubt and imposter syndrome, because a lot of times when I was at like math counts, there were only like 10 girls and there were like 200 competitors. And I was like, where are all the other girls? Like, do I really belong here? And I think that after speaking with a lot of girls, they had like similar feelings to me. And, even like some of the guys, they're like, do I belong here? So I think that like, communicating with people and like sharing my story with others has been able to help me overcome that social hurdle as well.
Sounds good. And I know you're only just a senior, but I was wondering in terms of like future plans, where do you see yourself in the future with, I know I already asked about integrals, but sort of just as a person, as a student, sort of maybe like career-wise or like with math in the math space, etc.
Mhm. So I really do love math, and I think sometimes people think that like you should be STEM or you should be humanities, and I'm like, why not combine both? Because they're so great. So I throughout high school, I've also done a lot of stuff with like history and like historical research and like making documentaries. And I found that I really enjoy like interacting with people and talking to people from like a humanistic perspective and point of view as well. So in the future, something that I'm really interested in is like technology policy and using policy to drive like like technological change, especially like nowadays like AI is a really big thing. People are always talking about AI regulations and AI safeguards, as they should be. And I think that in the future, exploring that more in depth in college and considering something like law school to go into a career and policy and more from a like a STEM policy perspective is something that I'm definitely interested in. And then like in terms of like what I want to study in college, honestly, I'm not 100% sure, but for right now, I'm on track to study science, technology, and society with a concentration like politics and policy. And next year, I'm planning on going to Stanford.
That sounds really cool. Since like speaking of artificial intelligence, I was wondering about your opinion specifically on artificial intelligence and its like role or like the role it should play in math in like right now, maybe like a decade into the future, maybe like a few more decades into the future.
Yeah, I think um honestly like at my school and just like in my community, I noticed that like artificial intelligence can be really helpful. I think in like especially like in condensing math topics and like problems into like more like simplistic and like normal terms, like I can finally understand what you're saying. So like I think that using artificial intelligence as like a learning tool can be really important. But also I think I like this is a pretty like I think I heard like a lot of people talking about this, but like there has been like a lot of issues with like artificial intelligence and like academic integrity as well. And like if you put in like a problem into like ChatGPT, it can solve it for you, but at the end of the day, you're not really learning anything as well. So I think that striking a good balance is really important, as with anything, but also I think we need to have, you know, right, like we need to have policies in place in classrooms where students can actually learn and develop like these original thinking skills while not being totally reliant on artificial intelligence. But I think that artificial intelligence has the potential to democratize education and specifically math education in really powerful ways as well.
Sounds good. And I think you've also mentioned that you are also very strong in like the humanities side. So I was just curious about if it does like at all like your math background, how that sort of or like your STEM background and how that may influence like your perspective on the humanities and vice versa and how that sort of has helped you grow as a student as like and as a person.
Mhm. So I think that my I think I just have a strong interest in like math and science. So like that kind of shapes like the humanities stuff I'm interested in. Like earlier today I was looking at like the Chernobyl incident and like like nuclear like the what happened with like the nuclear energy and like how that like affected the Russian society. So I think like that shapes my historical interest to a certain extent. But also I think that I one of my friends who was like interested in math and history said this to me, and I thought it was an interesting thing to say. But like when you do like a math proof or like a big technical problem, you kind of like break it down to smaller pieces. And I he said that it was similar to how you make a historical argument in the sense that you have this big thing that you're trying to argue or like this perspective that you're trying to develop, and you find like little stories or pieces of evidence to like support that. So I think that the way you solve problems in math and the way you can like write a historical paper or develop a historical argument, there are certain parallels. So I guess like doing one can help you, be a better thinker or change the way you think in the other to a certain capacity as well.
Wow, I've actually never really thought about that, but I think that does make a lot of sense. And then sort of to shift gears a little bit, I was wondering if you had any advice, suggestions, tips, tricks, honestly anything for high school students, middle school students, but particularly young girls who are interested in math, STEM, or like pursuing a career in something related to STEM or what you're currently doing like in the future.
Mhm. I think the biggest thing is you have to believe in yourself. A little while ago, I was actually reading like a research paper, and it was basically talking about like why some girls and gender minorities are underrepresented in STEM and specifically at like really higher levels. Like if you look at like corporate workforces, I saw a statistic like only less than 5% of like Silicon Valley founders and CEOs are women. So like at the really high levels of STEM, there still is a really big gender discrepancy. And one of the reasons why the researchers hypothesize is because of this phenomenon called the stereotype threat, which is basically where gender minorities are afraid to try and go into these fields because they are afraid that they're like reaffirming or that they may prove a negative stereotype about them, which I guess in the certain circumstances that like maybe gender minorities are unqualified to pursue STEM at that level, which is 100% untrue. So I think that with this in mind, being able to push yourself and believe in yourself is really important. It's like self belief and like affirmations is what I think can overcome threats like the stereotype threat. And then also I noticed that like a lot of times we as girls and gender minorities aren't always like inclusive towards others in this specific space. I don't like to think of like even math competitions as a competition against one another, but I think it should be seen as a means of like building community and supporting one another. So I think that if you are like the only like girl in a specific space, um or there's only like two girls, being will like lending a hand and being friendly and supportive is another really great place to start.
That's honestly a really transformative and amazing thought. And just to sort of end off, I was just wondering if you had any last words you'd like to share with our audience or like, yeah, just in general, anything.
Mhm. I think that something that my work has taught me, whether it's been with like making history documentaries or even like IndyIntegirls, is the importance of having your own voice and using that voice to bring about good change. So like with my historical documentaries, a lot of them focus on like social issues like racism and like educational equity, which are things that I'm passionate about as well. Yeah, and then obviously with IndyIntegrals, the problem I'm trying to address is a lack of representation in STEM and specifically high level STEM and gender representation. So I think that whatever problem you're passionate about, um, identifying that problem in your community and using your voice to solve it and to gather people and to practice leadership is a really good place to start because sometimes people are hesitant to believe that young girls can, affect change, or that little kids can like make a difference, and that's not the case. So I think that not holding back and pushing yourself forward and also pushing others is a great place to start for everyone, regardless of your background or what you are fighting for.
Very well said. Thank you so much. It was absolutely
Mhm.
phenomenal talking to you.
Thank you so much, Angelina.